أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Today, we have a segment called Deen-ly, which is a discussion with Muslim community leaders, leaders of Muslim congregations and masajid and other places. And the purpose of that segment is to address some of the issues, some of the ideas, some of the conflicts and struggles that we are encountering as Muslims, as Americans, as citizens of the world. And we are going to, inshallah, have some ideas and have some discussion with those community leaders. So today I have the pleasure of having Shaykh Husayn Mekki Abdulaziz with us. Assalamu alaikum, Shaykh. Welcome.
Wa alaikum salam. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. It is my pleasure. And I want to introduce Shaykh Husayn to us. Shaykh Husayn is originally from Philadelphia, so fly Eagles. He studied in the Hausa and Qom for many years. He, of course, is competent in Farsi and Arabic. The Sheikh also has a master's degree in religion, and he's currently doing his PhD at the University of Denver in education leadership and policy studies. Sheikh Hussein also has extensive experiences in different centers, different congregations, masajid, Husseinias across the country. He's done translation work, and he serves as the executive director of the Ahlul Bayt Assembly of America. So, Sheikh Hussein,
Yeah.
for our time today, there's a lot going on these days, and especially with the murder, we should say, of
Mhm.
the African American George Floyd, the issue of race, the issue of the treatment of minorities, the issue of institutional license, police and others, to do as they will without the repercussions to a degree are there. So that is what something I would like to hear from you about. So the question that we can start off our discussion with, inshallah, is what can be said about racism and institutional discrimination of minorities and African Americans in this country, and what does Islam have to contribute to that discussion in the public sphere?
Right. That's a important question, and I think that when we're having these discussions, one of the things that I'm finding out more and more, and it seems like I've been, talking about this topic a lot more and more, or people are interested in, discussing this topic more and more. Um, we have to understand the history of America and be able to look at the ugly side of things in order to really see what solutions might need to come out of that or what that might look like. I think there's a tendency for many of us to sometimes look at the isolated situation, to look at what happened to George Floyd and say, this officer, or these few officers, the one that knelt on his knee for, 7, 8, 9 minutes, and the ones who stood by, that they were guilty, and not to see that there is a system that allows this to be able to happen. And so it's not just, this officer that killed George Floyd, it's a system that murdered George Floyd. That's what we have to really become aware of and highlight. That can't really be done without looking back and connecting these dots from how was this, this possible. I remember, and I always tell people about this story of, like, I'm sitting with some friends, good people, and they're, saying that, it's really unfortunate how much African Americans get in trouble with the law. And why are they always, acting like that? Why are they always, there's drugs and this, and as if it's like a predisposed, problem, and just like they're just prone to crime or something like that. And he tried to make a distinction, saying, no, you're educated, and you're one of the good apples, and you're not like that. But the reality is as I explained to him, that I've been a victim of police brutality many a times, on more than one occasion, and that's something that I've lived, I've experienced, I've seen. I know that my brothers have experienced. I know my dad has experienced. My mom has experienced growing up, and so this is not something that's isolated. And that's the part where, once we begin to realize, it helps to really open up the conversation for, oh, this is not just isolated incidents that happen that are very bad. These are part of a greater systematic problem.
Absolutely. I think you're very accurate in pointing out that this is part of the history of this country. It is part of a very ugly history of this nation, and it is something that very easily is ignored or seen as a isolated incident. At the same time, well, I believe it was 9 minutes that he had his knee on the neck of
Yeah,
this African American gentleman, and it was not the first time, and
right,
sadly, and hopefully it's the last time. But hopefully it's the last time that something like this happens. But it happened with Ahmed Arbery in Georgia. It
right,
happened with that young man in Florida that was killed.
yeah,
Um, so, as you said, this system itself is there, and it's very difficult for someone who's not African American to walk in those shoes and to try to see. And we should have empathy to understand what is really the African American experience in this country.
right.
What would you say is the Islamic contribution to this discussion, and how does Islam see uh, the issue of race and racial difference in this, given this history? And how does Islam provide some ideas or policies for the institutions to incorporate this diversity and to understand how this history is kind of bringing us to where we are?
Right, absolutely. I mean, I think Malcolm X probably said it best when he referred to racism as being a malignant cancer, and he said that the cure is Islam. You
Mm.
know, and it really is the only solution. And I have to qualify this with making a distinction because sometimes people um, are taken aback by some of the actions they see from Muslims, and unfortunately, Muslim and Islam are not always practically synonymous, although they should be. You know, we should hold ourselves and other Muslims to a high standard, being and being reflections of Islam. But yes, there may be shortcomings amongst Muslims. But in Islam itself, the idea and the values, it's, you know, like verse 49:13, you know, Surah Hujarat, verse 13, Allah speaks to everyone, you know. And then one of the things I love about the verse is that it says, yeah, it starts with Ya Ayyuhan Nas. So it's not limited to, hey, Muslims, this is a solution for Muslims. It's saying humanity, this is a solution for you. You
Yeah.
know, the person who's best is, you know, the person who their God consciousness, their God wariness is the greatest.
Mhm.
So that's the aspect that's going to be a solution for society and in America. I think if people embraced this, then it wouldn't be, you know, racism in the way that it is.
Yeah. Yeah. And just to read that verse, Surah 49, verse 13, Ya ayyuhan nasu inna khalaqnakum min dhakarin wa untha wa ja'alnakum shu'uban wa qaba'ila lita'arafu. So, O people, we have created you from male and female, and we have made you tribes and groups so that you may know each other, right? So that you may have knowledge of each other. Inna akramakum indallahi atqakum. Surely the most honorable of you, noble of you in the sight of Allah is the most pious of you. And certainly that verse does do away with the existence of racial difference, but it
Right.
does away with the concept of racial superiority, right? And
Exactly.
it,
And
it
I think that coupled with the other verse where Allah says in Surah Rum, I believe it's verse 22, but where He says that these are, you know, min ayatihi, from
Mhm,
amongst His signs, these are the differences in your language and your colors.
mhm.
So put it into perspective that these are the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us ja'alnakum, that He created these different nations and tribes. But then He puts into perspective for us the value and as you put it, the racial superiority that is non-existent from his perspective.
Yeah, yeah. And certainly from what you've said, and Malcolm X that you mentioned, I think the African American experience with Islam, the African American association
Mhm.
with Islam, has been this one of the things that I believe that attracted Malcolm X when he went for Hajj. You know, he saw that really the worship of Allah, the worship of God in that one place when he went to that pilgrimage to Mecca, with people from all across, right? And
Oh,
and the narrative of racial superiority kind of just fell by the side in that particular spiritual moment for him.
Absolutely. And, it's the assassination of Malcolm X was obviously so unfortunate. I mean, he was definitely significant for my parents. And
Mm.
I actually I might say that any person who converted to Islam was, in some way, shape, or form, probably in America, was impacted by, Malcolm X's, his growth and how he evolved, who he was as a person,
Yeah.
and definitely what you saw at that moment. Yeah, the letter that he writes, I always encourage people, to Google, find this letter, to read it. It's so beautiful, and put into perspective that even seeing, as much as he has seen injustice and racial superiority and how it played out in the United States, he said, "Well, Islam can eradicate all of that." And that's what he wanted to really. That was a point, and towards the end of his life, unfortunately, where he
Mm.
was really trying to put focus on that, and we unfortunately didn't get to hear more.
We don't. You're right. And his life is certainly worthy of studying, and his message toward the end of his life. Now, Sheikh, now the Islam that is present today, and you have this experience going to different centers and congregations and jamaats and masajid and Husayniyas and other places, what has your experience been in general as an African American sheikh or someone with that pastoral or religious authority? You are African American and you present yourself to a community which might be mixed, which might be South Asian or Arab or Persian, with their own conceptions, with their own borrowed ideas about race and what race is. And how did you find that experience in general? And how are some of the things that we can learn from that experience?
Yeah, I think probably a lot of. I mean, I would say that a lot of people who, African Americans who came to Islam, they came to Islam really. I mean, their families themselves, and they came to really, or in their mind was the utopia of what Islam is. In their mind was, wow, this is like these ayat that we're mentioning.
Mm.
There's justice in Islam. So there is no one's going to mistreat. Everyone's going to be treated fairly. Brothers are going to be hugging and loving. Everything is going to be, all rosy, as they say. But then there comes that, difference where you interact with Muslims, and, they have, some people have different shortcomings. And I believe definitely it's an impact, in the immigrant community. They're coming from places where a lot of them have, imperialism and colonial mindsets have created some kind of indoctrination where they themselves see a sense of inferiority to white supremacy or to Eurocentrism. And so when they come, that perpetuates, even in this setting. But I think that's maybe, even though that's one of the challenges, I think that it's also one of the unique opportunities, because here we have people from all cultures in this country, and together Muslims from every background.
Mm.
The strength of what could be possible if people were really practicing Islam
Yeah.
and coming together, like it's phenomenal what might be able to be. So you go in with the hope that, there is that sense of, as much Islam as you can, but have expectation of a reality that sometimes there are, talq, bitter
Mhm.
experiences that people, especially African Americans, and they feel disenfranchised within the Muslim community,
Yeah.
and that's unfortunate. So I think at this time and era where, there's a real wave of concern, genuine concern, I believe. I think, inshallah, some of these things will, be addressed and, fixed.
Yes, I agree with you. Absolutely. The mindset of some of those who are immigrants from South Asia or East Africa or other places as Muslims who come to that. And, my background is South Asian and, that comes with that package is the colonial and the Eurocentric mindset. And sadly, when Muslims start to practice their Islam here, that kind of continues. But what you're saying and what Islam is calling us toward is kind of questioning some of those assumptions and
Mm,
removing some of those attachments, not employing them and putting them aside, and coming to this Islamic concept of piety being that crucial place where we compete with each other in piety, and racial
Mhm.
differences are to be put aside, and
Absolutely.
and Muslims can unite, Muslims can work together. Coming from such a wide background and having so many resources together, we can really put our minds, put our hearts together when we stand together in prayer and in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
What would you say is some of the duties, and for addressing that specifically, how can we do it in a practical manner? So if someone has a, because now we see in the Midwest and in other places, there are these groups that are forming.
Mhm.
Those people who are reverts, those people who have come to Islam not having been born in an Islamic Muslim family, those who are from different backgrounds, right? They are forming a community and a sense of identity for themselves. That might be a space for them in relation to, and sometimes in harmony with, the traditional centers and masajid, sometimes in conflict, right? So
Mhm.
how can we work this out on a practical way? What are some of the things that we can look for and avoid
Yeah.
when we have this?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was having this conversation with someone, and there's an idea that kind of came up with um, what I call a cultural exchange, and taking this to a very formal level, because when the Muslims, Islam will help a person in their individual life, but when we're talking about on the social capacity or making serious, movement type of changes or changes in society, that has to come when we're connected to one another.
Mm.
That's not possible unless we allow that to be possible. So we become our own barriers. To remove the barriers, one of them is if culture has become a barrier for people to connect, to interact. I mean, you think about time to a particular masjid or center, they refer to it by the culture of the people who go there.
Yeah.
That's the masjid, that's the Farsi center, that's the Iranian center, that's the Khoja center. That's how we identify in that cultural, little bubble. Obviously, there's not as much association with all the other different types of Muslims along the spectrum.
Mm.
Imagine if they come together. So cultural exchange is necessary. Times when people learn and intentionally try to learn about maybe prejudices that they didn't even realize they had,
Yeah.
learn about other cultures and what's, I really think that, obviously when Allah in that verse the beautiful verse that you recited, obviously Allah could have said, I don't make you into different nations and tribes. I make you one nation and tribe. I make you one person, and you're just carbon copied.
Mm.
But the beauty is in those very differences. You know what I mean? I always encourage people, like, listen, try different foods. So
Yeah.
Montilla is great, biryani is great. I
Yeah.
love myself a good Philly cheesesteak, as you know that
Yeah.
you're from that neck of the woods,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So, but when we embrace those things, we can really appreciate each other more.
Yeah.
So I think we need more cultural exchange.
Yeah, and the biryani with the cheesesteak has to be deliberate. It has to be intentional, right? I mean, it
Yes,
happens. I've seen in my experience, it happens accidentally.
yes,
In a place like California, Northern California, where everyone is living together and serving together, it happens accidentally. But in other places, it has to happen intentionally. I think this message is for the leaders of Muslim communities and congregations to make that cultural exchange, like you said, to be a part of their agenda, not just live in their bubble and be comfortable and say, maybe if it happens, it happens, but intentionally go out there and address some of these uncomfortable issues. Absolutely. Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely.
That inshallah needs to be done. And lastly, Sheikh, I would like to see what you would recommend as our civic duty, coming back to addressing this issue of race in America. We've talked about understanding, having empathy for those who have suffered this, trying to address this, at the same time being aware as Muslims. What are some of the practical things that we can do to be part of this movement of change, because this movement has been hijacked in some places, right?
Right.
Looters, people go and loot, for example, unnecessarily. The distraction goes on this kind of destruction that's going, without focusing on those who are genuinely and authentically calling for change and improvement. So
Right.
how do we discern and see how is it that we can really be part of this this change and put an end in a peaceful and in a just manner to this institutional discrimination?
Right. Yeah. I mean, you mentioned the looting, and I saw, even within that, obviously there was a lot of instances where people who are not even part of protests are coming, and they look like they're part of some white supremacist organization, and they're coming and they're trying to put flames on the fire,
Hmm.
and things like that, or people being insensitive to, like, how much anger gets pent up, for so long when there's so this degree of injustice.
Yeah.
Um, I really, really, there's two things that kind of I would like to highlight. One is that, you know, the murder of George Floyd was so egregious.
Yeah.
It was so incredibly heinous and just difficult for any human being to stomach. Even the people who were maybe a little bit more in denial of the realities of racism in this country, or the existence of police brutality. It was for a lot of people. You saw that, they were coming, people who maybe even even some media outlets that were more not in favor of even highlighting these things. You saw that come out. You saw all kinds of people were witnessing that. One of the things, so there's an emotional connection that's, actually happening right now.
Hmm.
Emotional connection that exists in this reality. What I want to say is that don't let those emotions die away.
Yeah.
You know, we've seen. I remember when I was younger, there was Rodney King,
Hmm.
and there was an incident, and there were people protesting everywhere. People they were so angry that how can this injustice happen? Somebody get beaten into a pulp, and then the system of justice say, hey, it's no big deal, it's fine, and it made people very angry, and we saw something similar. But what happened over time was that kind of died away. You remember there was an Occupy movement where
Yeah.
people were protesting about different things. Over some time, it kind of died away. I would like to see things not die away
Hmm.
by people taking the moment and kind of harnessing this moment of anger. I don't think it's a problem. Don't disregard the anger.
Yeah.
Don't feel okay after a while. Okay, well, we have a couple of reforms and some laws, and so now I feel better and go back to my life. Like, the system hasn't completely changed. These issues are still going to exist. So number one, maintaining that sense of concern long after protests maybe are not happening and things like that.
Yeah.
The second thing that I would like to highlight is just the importance of education.
Hmm.
I remember, like, when I was teaching some kids, and I told them that there was a quote from Malcolm X, and we're talking about this quote, and it was really kind of ahead of its time, and they were trying to, add your perspective, kind of look up and things. And so we got to the discussion, went around and got to KKK, and when he was younger, Malcolm X, they came and burned down his house,
Yeah.
and it says that the authorities came and watched it happen and just watched it burn. Um, I asked them, some questions about the KKK, and they said, well, this is America. Those kind of places can't do terrorism and exist. And then I said, okay, I want everybody to go to their computers and look up this website. And so as they looked up the website, they said they can't have a website, but not realizing that this was something that was still going on.
Yeah.
They had a website, and at that time, this was 2010, I will never forget. On their website in 2010, there was a section that said, if you're a police officer, sign up here to learn how you can help the cause.
Yeah.
And it didn't really sink in for these middle schoolers completely, I think. I hope
Hmm.
later on it did.
Hmm.
But education about these realities is, I think, the biggest component that's going to motivate us to be able to make those changes. I have a video about some recommended readings. I think those are very helpful to put some things into perspective. One of them, which I'll just highlight and mention, is about being anti-racist.
Yeah.
And I kind of connect that to the idea of Karbala, where you had those different groups, and One of the groups were people who said, "Oh, I didn't fight against Imam Hussein." Well, you didn't help him either.
Yeah.
You know, Sama'at wa radiyat bidhalik. You know, you heard the cry and you just kind of wanted to, what do we say, stick your head in the sand and be indifferent. And you're an enabler of the problem. So being educated, I think right now is one of the best things we can do for the long-term solutions.
Absolutely. No, that's the providing education, knowing about how these things function, knowing the subtleties, and knowing where these things are showing up and addressing them, calling it out. Absolutely. I think that's part of the everyday duty as Muslims and as citizens that we can really do, inshallah.
Absolutely.
So Sheikh, I want to thank you for your time, inshallah. And under this video, I will link some of the things that you talked about, and hopefully that we create more awareness and we address these issues in our masajid, in our lives, inshallah.
Alhamdulillah. Thank you for doing the good work and, you know, having these kind of programs. It's really appreciated. May Allah give you more tawfiq and success.
Thank you so much.
Alhamdulillah. Take care.